This is Robert Stark. I am joined here with Jamie Stewart from the band Juju. Jamie, great talking to you.
You too. Thanks for having me.
And I'm also joined here with my co-host, Pilleater.
Hey, how's it going, Robert? Nice to meet you, Jamie.
Hi, nice to meet you.
I think to start things off, Pilleater, you've been a fan of Jamie's work for quite some time. I've actually discovered him fairly recently. Pilleater, do you want to talk kind of briefly about your...
It's funny because the first time I ever heard of Zuzu was probably in high school, and I actually was... I'm around the Philadelphia area, and sometimes I get records at this one record store. I remember first coming across... I forget, I think it's Chapel of Chimes. I think it was like a 12-inch record I got for $1. And I got that with like Masana, which is like this Japanese noise musician. And I remember just hearing it for like 1 or 2 bit. And I had this interesting impression on it. And then all of a sudden it just appeared in my record collection. And then like years later, just a few years ago in college, I had a girlfriend that said she really liked Zuzu. I was like, wait a second, I think I might know that. And then I kind of rediscovered it past 2 years ago, and recently I was able to go see you, Jamie, play in Philadelphia during the Twin Peaks tour, and it was a very rainy day, and it kind of set the mood for the coming Halloween of October, and I just thought it was very interesting, and so yeah, it's a very that's how I came across it. I was just thinking about it again, so.
Jamie, you grew up in LA in the 80s and early 90s. Can you talk about... and I'm also an LA native.
Cool.
Can you talk about your experience growing up, and who were some of your early musical influences?
I grew up in a suburb of Los Angeles called the Valley, famously the origin of basically the way that almost everybody... under the age of 35 talks now. And I mean, anyone who's grown up in, even though it was in Los Angeles, it was still just a fairly bleak suburb. It was pretty remarkably boring.
What part of the valley specifically?
Weirdly, my parents we moved about every year and a half, but just different parts of the valley. So, I lived in Reseda, I lived in Northridge, I lived in Granada Hills, I lived in Porter Ranch, I lived in Sherman Oaks, I lived in Pacoima, just kind of weirdly all over the place all the time. The upside was my dad was in the music business, and my parents were hippies, so although I lived in a relatively bleak environment, they were not completely removed from some of the more interesting parts of life. And by the time I was a little older, I started going to a magnet school called Fairfax. It was actually in Los Angeles. So when I was an older teen, I got to see a little bit more diversified part of existence. So it was a strange combination of being in a cultural wasteland, but at the same time, having parents who were interested in art and music and things like that. When I was a kid, my as I said, my dad was in the music business, so he was. I might go so far as to say a little dictatorial and relatively critical about what I would listen to, which in some ways was annoying because when you're a kid, you want to listen to whatever stupid music you want to listen to. But he did turn me on to some things that as a younger person I wouldn't have listened to, like Talking Heads and Motown and Stax Records and Prince and things like that. So from him I got into that side of music, and then the friends that I had at that age were all goth kids, so I listened to Bauhaus and all the 4AD, like earlier before 4AD became a crap label.
Were you influenced by like 80s synthwave?
Oh yeah.
I love Italio disco. I just listen to it all the time.
So that's relatively obvious. Yeah. I mean, all those kind of bands, and they're still among my favorite bands.
Do you like Eurobeat? It's kind of like a new age Italio disco, very popular in Japan, or Ever heard of it?
I'm not really familiar with that.
Oh, okay. It's
But
kind of
I
like
probably would.
it's kind of like Italio disco, but it's like made by Italians for Japanese, and it's very big and kind of was big in '90s Japan. But it just makes me think of that.
Oh, funny, interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I'll check it out.
And your work has a lot of Asian and Japanese influences. How did you originally kind of get interested in Asian culture?
Oh, let's see. My grandpa was a sailor, and he sailed all over the Pacific Rim, and he's dead now, so I can tell this. He used to smuggle people from Asia to the United States. Like not in any sort of slavery kind of way, but just people who wanted to come to the United States from Asia, but weren't able to come legally. And in lieu of getting paid in cash for tax reasons, he would accept antiques. So growing up, my grandparents' house was filled with antiques from Asia, from all over the entire Pacific Rim.
I think I have one. My grandfather had an uncle who traveled around the world, so I had some like old Chinese statue from like 100 years ago. But I think some cleaning person came over and it broke, and like we had to like glue it back together.
Oh, it is the fate of many ceramics. So through him, and then just from buying records. When I was younger, I would just buy records kind of based on the cover, and I bought a Gamelan record, and that kind of set me on the path of listening to music outside of just things that were on Top 40 radio.
That's funny because I kind of did the same thing when I was a very young teenager. I mean, my older brother, he's into hardcore and he has a band and whatnot. But, I didn't like punk records per se, but I just liked getting cheap, funny records for like $1 in the record store. And most of it is, I like the dance records actually and the old house records. And, I just find that's kind of very interesting to say that there's this kind of culture where you have to find these things, especially before an internet age. And now that you have the internet, you kind of find it through like Google searching or just from hear of word. I don't know. There's something interesting about that.
Yeah, it's a nice part of life. It's actually how I think on one day, it was an incredibly fortuitous day. I just entirely based on covers. I bought a Ryuichi Sakamoto record, a Gamelan record, and a New Order record.
It's funny because
all of them totally luck and all brilliant records.
It's funny because when I think of Gamelan, I think of like that 80s movie Akira, that at the very end in the soundtrack, it's kind of like it goes from this like 80s synth Gamelan or something like that, and I kind of think of the film Akira or other things. I kind of think of like very folkish kind of music. One thing I think about all the time is like neo-folk music, and I'm pretty much thinking of Death in June, where this kind of you're making this reference to the past or some kind of strange tradition. I mean, Deaf in June has this controversial act, like, he has this association with like neo-Nazis and stuff, but it's like this weird neo-folk background. But for your music, it's interesting because with that influence, it makes me think that it's maybe some kind of neo-Asian folk or something to the opposite of Deaf in June or something.
Jamie's work kind of combines like ancient influence and like a futuristic influence at the same time. Like traditional Japanese music with like synth wave and a more futuristic influence.
I don't know that we've never tried to be too intellectual about it. I think we've just tried to take sounds that touched our hearts in one way or the other and put them together. There wasn't so much of any real analysis behind it.
On the topic of like Japanese culture, I noticed you on your Facebook page you mentioned like going to the Japanese pavilion at LACMA in LA, and I remember I used to go there like all the time as a kid.
Oh yeah. We a friend of mine who I do a lot of art with, David Horvitz, and we did a sound installation there a couple days ago. Or Shushu, Angelina from Shushu, and David did.
That's funny because when my one girlfriend, I'm kind of was an Asian studies major, and she only liked Juju because it was kind of that Asian influence in there. I just think that's kind of quirky, where it's like, oh, I think she liked Angela much more, or something like that, as kind of this role model for it, or something. And I don't know. It's interesting that
Angela is a role model.
Yeah,
she
is.
Extraordinarily great musician. She's a brilliant person. She's politically active. Angela's a role model much more so than I am.
Exactly, and I just think it's funny is because there's that looking up towards, especially in and it's funny because I would hear Juju again just a few years ago, and out of the strangest all places, Asian studies, where I don't know. I always think it's interesting too because I noticed you reference Yukio Mishima as an influence. If that's correct.
Yeah.
Oh, you definitely. Do you often incorporate some of the Japanese lit into your work, or?
I incorporate a lot of literature, and I mean, I have a stacks and stacks of notebooks filled with lines of things that I've read that I feel relatively directly. I'm a horrendous thief, as I think almost everyone who writes lyrics is. But literature generally, I borrow from fairly liberally.
Are you a fan of Paul Schrader's Mishima, A Life in Four Chapters? I mean, I'm a big fan of, especially like the aesthetics of that film.
Oh yeah, I thought it was beautiful. It's a great movie.
What do you think about these kind of like genres, like vaporwave? Like it's sort of like experimental music, but it combines sort of like a Japanese aesthetics with like a 80s nostalgia.
I'm not super familiar with it.
Well, it's everywhere. If you go on YouTube and just write vaporwave anything, it's pretty much just like getting old technology of that like Muzak from like 80s models or old animes, and they just slow it down on a sampler and just like I know One of Tricks Point Never was kind of the originator with that with Echo Jams, and it just kind of launched from there and stuff like that. But it's very popular among the internet crowd.
Oh, okay. That sounds like something that would be greatly enhanced by our old friend Dope.
Your work is a very visual in the performance and in your videos. I mean, I'm a visual artist and painter, and I'm really interested in that aesthetics in general. Do you have any visual artists that were great influences on you?
Yeah, absolutely. Kara Walker, Jan Vo, Agnes Martin. Off the top of my head, those are probably my big favorites. And Antoine Diagata.
Do you often?
Yeah, off the top of my head, those are my favorites. Yeah. I
mean, with the whole release of Twin Peaks, it seems that you would also have an interest in the filming of like David Lynch. I mean, how much of that is influenced?
Yes, deeply, massive David Lynch. Everyone at Shushi was a really intense.
We have a whole album based on it. It's just really interesting.
Oh yeah, I mean, we covered the music from Twin Peaks. I mean, I think we could not do what we were doing were it not for David Lynch. Particularly Twin Peaks, his sort of his approach to how that was organized, and the juxtaposition of things that are funny and horrifying and weirdly sexual and supernatural. All of that is a deep and profound influence on what we're doing.
Did you work on the original Twin Peaks, or this is an album inspired by the film, or is this a project with David Lynch?
Oh no, I was a child when the original Twin Peaks came out.
I wish you worked on it.
Oh yeah, I forgot. So you were born in the late 70s. You must have been like 12 years old. That's kind of a stupid question.
I remember.
Oh no, it's fine. I mean, it probably would have been fascinating if he had a 12-year-old working on it.
I remember Twin Peaks. I think in like middle school, and I remember just watching like the first 5 episodes, and I think the eeriest part was the soundtrack, and I just felt kind of strange in this mood. That didn't really... Like, I still don't know what to think about Twin Peaks. I mean, I do like the jokes with, like, the log lady and, like, the guy that goes, there's a fish in the percolator. Kind of weird stuff like that, and I get it's kind of dry humor. But I always find it's a very interesting piece of film as there's a lot to dissect from it. I just... I don't know what to say on it.
I was
absolutely.
working on this painting in my art class, and someone suggested. They said, "Oh, your painting looks just like a Twin Peaks in Blue Velvet." So I had to go out and check those films out.
No, it's funny.
Well, there are worse comparisons.
No, it's funny because when I think of David Lynch, I really like Dune. I don't know. I just find that his Dune adaptation was much more just big and interesting. It could have been Star Wars, but it wasn't. And I always feel like, in some respect, David Lynch owes some kind of tribute to the film aesthetic of how we think about Dune compared to there once was Alexander Jodorowsky's Dune, which was supposed to be made a long time ago, but never was. And then it's like David Lynch ended up making it, and it's kind of well forgotten. But now when you look at it, it is this kind of gem that should be re-examined, I always think.
Oh yeah, Dune is remarkable.
Can you talk more about your current Twin Peaks project?
About how it started, how we ended up doing it, or what?
Yeah,
how
it started.
It's a little bit of a long story. Shayna Dunkelman, who is a percussionist in Shushu, and I, on the first tour that we went on together, we didn't know each other particularly well. We had been just sort of put together through friends. So at the end of one show, she was playing vibraphone on that tour. She started playing the opening theme from Twin Peaks, and I didn't know that she was a giant Twin Peaks fan, and she didn't know that I was. So I started freaking out about it. I was super excited that she was playing it, and then frequently when one is on tour, one makes all these kind of plans for fun side projects, whatever. Most of them, nothing happened. But so the seed had kind of been planted, and then about a year after that, we ran into a friend of ours, an Australian artist named Lawrence English. He was on tour, and we were on tour, and we met in Amsterdam, and over lunch, he was talking about how a friend of his was putting together the biggest retrospective of David Lynch's art at the National Museum of Australia in Brisbane, or Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane. And Shayna got very, very excited and insisted to Lawrence that we play the Twin Peaks soundtrack there, and he thought it was a great idea. And then it took about another year to get that together, but a year after that, we played it a couple times at that museum. And we thought we were only going to do it there, but we enjoyed doing it so much that we continued to do it. And right after that happened, it was announced that they were going to be redoing the series. So interest in Twin Peaks everywhere increased tremendously. So it was just kind of good timing on our part that we happened to be doing it at the same time that interest in the series was being reignited. And we played a few shows, and we recorded a record of it last year. And it came out this spring, and we've just gone around and played a few shows of it here and there. It's been incredibly enjoyable. People have been very, very generous and sweet about it.
How well do you know David Lynch, and what is it like working with him?
Oh, I've never worked with him. I met him for about 5 seconds. Last month. He was incredibly sweet and nice, and I met Angelo Badalamenti at that time.
And he doesn't even know
he knows about the project, and he approves of it, but we've never worked together, and I don't really know. He was very, very nice.
That's unfortunate. It's like you like someone, and it's like you wish you could know that person more, and it's just... oh. I think it's interesting...
Many, many unrequited loves in life.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, though. I was thinking about music videos in Juju. I mean, some of it, it's funny. I think the very first video I saw by you guys was Dear God, I Hate Myself, where I think Angela is like going to vomit on you. It's this kind of cringe, kind of worthy, I don't know, it's just vomiting. I just find that very experimental, like some Andy Warholian porn or something like that. I mean...
Wait, did she actually vomit, or it was a simulation?
No, it was...
No, she really did.
Yes.
Was this planned out?
Yeah, the video is, she has this incredible ability to make herself throw up whenever she wants to, and the entire video is just her throwing up for 3 minutes, and then she turns and throws up on me at the end.
It's funny because that's very like of the experimental kind of film, and it's definitely kind of that attitude of that avant-garde style. I mean, I our co-host Alex von Goldstein, he said that maybe we should record a show when somebody's getting a blowjob while recording, or something like that. You know, it's silly, but it's like it works. And in some kind of respect, if you watch that video, it's kind of this softcore porn, but it's like not the feeling as if porn. And it makes me feel if that's some kind of...
No, I mean there was nothing sexual about it. I mean she had dealt with issues of or had dealt with eating disorders all of her life. And it was more about a direct illustration of being in a sense of distress about one's own body and dealing with issues of eating. It wasn't something sexual at all.
Oh, okay.
It was about like muddling through ideas of feeling disconnected from one's own body or not liking or not wanting one's own body and being criticized for what one's body's like and dealing with that in a physical way.
That's interesting. I mean, I was just thinking about Yukio Mishima again, and I was thinking of he had a lover. I kind of noticed in my Asian studies class named Akihiro Miwa. Do you know about him? He was basically.
I don't. I mean, I've read Mishima's books, but I don't know. I mean, aside from all the crazy
he was
bullshit, I don't know.
Well, yeah, he was a cross-dresser and drag queen, and they actually were in a couple of films together. Their most famous one was Black Lizard, and Miwa was basically this, cross-dressing gangster that would leave this black lizard mark on everyone. And Mishima in that film was this kind of clay doll that would come to life and like kill people or something very. But there's this deep theme in about Miwa. Hardly any of his work is translated. It's just usually commentary and through films, but Miwa has this kind of, along with Mishima, there's some aspect about the body, especially with Miwa, where it's obviously, it's kind of frowned upon in the subject where it's like, it's a cross-dresser, some kind of drag queen, but it's like there's this super sexual nature to it, and you can still have pride in it. I mean, like, I'm a big fan of like yaoi and kind of old school stuff, and makes me think of old school like manga, kind of like Patario, and that's a very strange late 70s yaoi about men.
Was Patario considered a controversial?
I mean, yeah. I mean, well, Wikipedia accordingly says it's the first yaoi or shonei relations between, like, there's that soft pedophile interest in it, but at the same time it was kind of this show that the anime that came out in the early 80s was targeted to all audience, particularly girls, but there was something boys in that little boys can like and little girls, and it's like to think of a world where it's all just men cross-dressing and little boys where they all like each other, and it just
but it's not, you're saying it's not explicit, it's kind of more subtle.
Yeah, I mean there is some controversial stuff in that, especially as like I don't even know how to because I've read some of the Japanese manga, but I just don't know how to translate it in proper English, and it's still kind of a controversial subject to talk about, and it's like, that's why there's kind of this underground thing and love for it. It's a very interesting manga, but it makes me think of Mishima's relationship with Miwa, and about that, and how it comes from that generation. Well, we had a recent podcast, a show about Peter Sotos, and I was recently doing something on the commentary of Peter Sotos, and I think somewhere...
I think the overall theme was the film Sallow and the Marquis de Sade, but we dedicated a significant part of the show to Sotos. And it just said somewhere that, Jamie, you were actually interested in Peter Sotos' work. I don't know, I just wanted to confirm.
We are. We're friends. He's an incredibly nice person.
I have Index and Selfish Little, and I recently have mine. And I don't know, I was just doing some commentary. I'm trying to write a book. Not actually a book, but I have some blog posts and some of his commentary. I just think it's very interesting that he has this... he plays with sadomasochism and like this whole child pornography, but at the same time, it's like this... It is shock art, but it's not exactly the crude kind of for the sake, where there is some moralism between his work. And
I view him, like, when I first heard about him, I thought he was just this guy who was kind of a troll and trying to put out shock value. But I see Sotos as a serious, like, social commentator, because he talks about these people like Nancy Grace on CNN, and they take this, like, hyper-moralistic position, but they make sort of a living out of, like, human suffering by telling all these stories about, like, rapes and murders. So Sotos has a lot of stuff of value to bring.
Yeah, he's a complicated figure, without a doubt. But a serious artist. I mean, he's there. In no way is he doing what he's doing merely to shock people.
How did you originally meet Sotos?
I had been a fan of his for a long time, and I can't remember if we talked over email before we met, but I was on tour with Swans and Michael from Swans and Peter Sotos are old friends, and he was backstage at a show, and Michael introduced me to him. It was exciting to get to hang out with both of them at the same time, and then since then we've stayed in touch and gone out for drinks a couple of times.
That's interesting, because when I heard of Sotos, really it was from the band White House and some of the lyrics behind that. And it's funny because White House, again, has this interest in Asian culture. I write about this, but, Trevor Brown doing the art for some of the mid-White House releases and Sotos with the lyrics kind of have this very strange mix together. And it makes me think it goes back to that whole Mishima Dasad thing. And I just think it's a very interesting reoccurring theme in this avant-garde art where, particularly I was thinking of how it's, I don't know, there seems to be this flirtation with Asian culture, even though when it seems to me that it's just like this brutal version of it, or this kind of, like when I'm kind of raised in this Asian background where it's kind of dainty and kind of, respect authority, but when there's this like Western like punk interest and like Asian culture, it's kind of like they want it to be everything of the opposite and to the extreme. And I find that that's interesting. I mean, I don't know what to say on it.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Not sure. I mean,
so you mentioned you grew up in LA and you moved to the SF Bay Area. I mean, I can kind of relate to that because I'm an LA native, but I've always San Francisco's always been my favorite city since I was a kid. Can you talk about some of your observations on the differences between LA and San Francisco and your favorite parts of both cities?
I never actually lived in San Francisco. I lived in Oakland and I lived in San Jose. I've obviously been to San Francisco a lot of times, though. There's actually a fair number of similarities. I mean, both cities are politically very progressive. They're both diverse. There's great food. There's great weather in both places. San Francisco is about a tenth of the size of Los Angeles, so it's, obviously a little bit more limited and compact in what you can find there. They look different because they're in geographically different places, but I think too much has been made about the tonal differences between both cities. I feel very at home and very happy to be in both places.
Yeah, I live in the Philadelphia area. I'm just very familiar with Philadelphia, but down on South Street, that's where all like record stores are at. And some of the other venues. But my favorite part actually of Philadelphia is actually Chinatown. I just find it very comfortable, and I see most friends into Chinatown. And it's this really strange Philadelphia culture that exists in Chinatown, where it's the mix between, having, some of them are just like normal people, businessmen, and then sometimes you have these eccentric people that will talk about art and, stuff like, like bands and stuff. And I just find I always have this comfortable feeling just being around that Chinatown area in Philadelphia. It's kind of like my go-to spot when I have a friend to hang out with. So,
Pilleater, is it a super touristy? I mean, the SF Chinatown is a really cool place to visit, but
it's very small. The Chinatown in Philly,
so it's not super touristy.
No, it's just very small, and it's right next to Trocadero, which is a big music venue in Philadelphia. You could take the train to get there, and everything is really in walking distance. It's just impossible to park in that area. I mean, that's, I'll usually take a girlfriend or two to Chinatown. I always have a great time being in, Chinatown. I find that it's like you can only find that culture in Philadelphia. I don't know. But this is probably just being around Philly so much that it becomes almost habit.
Hey, I hate to be a pain in the ass, but my cat just ran out the door. I have to go get him.
Oh, crap.
I'll be back with you guys in a minute. Sorry.
Oh, crap.
That's fine.
Huh. I have a Siamese cat. She's
I have a cat too.
okay, because I'm just thinking about. I want to go back to my girlfriend and just think about how I tried to say role models with it, and I'm about to say, it's back to the role modeling, and it's just like, when I say, I'm gonna just be honest, when my friends think about Zuzu, they think about Asian culture, and I've referenced this, and I'm actually writing. I actually want to pay attention to, because Jamie did write something about his own sexual encounters in his own Sotos book. Yeah, I'm trying to pinpoint him on the ideal of trying to lead in saying Angela, being, because like my girlfriend really looked up to Zuzu.
We can't get a hold of Jamie, but Pilleater, do you want to continue on these topics?
Yeah, sure. I would ask Jamie of the interesting fact that it is interesting, though, to think about Juju and some of these other acts, like Alex said in his notes about Mitski. She's kind of this half-Japanese indie singer, and according to notes by Alex writes, quote, "I remember in 2009 people told me the band Pavement was for 40-year-old white dudes. In 2015, young white women tried to reconstruct Pavement. There was a band called Babeman that was an all-young white girl Pavement cover band. And now these white feminists are starting to replace by non-white women, like the mixed-race Mitski, and transvestites like the band Florist. But I wonder how long these people will be relevant for," unquote. So I really didn't know what Mitski was until Alex said it, and I looked her up, and she's like this really cute 26-year-old Japanese indie rock singer. And I don't know, I have to say this to Alex. I don't know. I feel like I'm gonna fall in love with her if I get to know her more often. But she has that weird Asian Aryan mystique where
Just looking at imagery from Pilleater, and you see a lot of that imagery. Like the characters have like the blonde hair, but with the Japanese features.
Yeah, and it's really influenced from like Art Nouveau, like Andre Beardsley.
Art Nouveau?
Yeah, Art Nouveau, like Beardsley and Harry O. Clark, and things are like in 2D, and it's this it does remind me of that alt-left thing that, Rabbit does like the whole 1960s kitsch TV collecting. I think Pataleo is like this kind of gay James O'Mara, Juju, this avant-garde style of like messing with kids in like gay film, and it's just like I don't know what to think about it, and I find it very controversial. And it's like this is something I learned in Asian studies, and it's just like wow, and it's just something to need to be talked about and makes Yukiya Mishima's work more relevant. And so,
and I kind of see like alt left as being kind of the movement of like the avant-garde, because on one hand, you have like the mainstream left, which is they're very politically correct and they want to police what people can and can't say. But you see the same with the alt-right. They also want to. They would be offended by a lot of things we talk about as well. Like I kind of see like being the alt-left as like a movement of like avant-garde, a lot of the movement of like creative types, and just being able to kind of freely express yourself. Like I'm not a libertarian per se. Like I support I see a rule for government in a lot of things, but I am a sort of absolutist when it comes to like freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and that's kind of like why I can respect people like Peter Sotos, like the concept of being able to say whatever you want. I'm sort of a absolutist on free speech.
Yeah, I mean, Sotos also wrote the afterword for The Gates of Janus, which is the very controversial Farrah House book with the introduction by Colin Wilson. I mean, it's a very interesting that he's almost like insulting the audience or some kind of the reader itself, and how far can you go with that? I mean, with Jamie having that interest in that, makes you think to yourself that there is some flirtation with the text and how free you can do. I mean, the alt-right would obviously call that degenerate, it probably is degenerate. But when it turns out that it's like you're just doing it for the sake of being an artist and let other people trying to understand different views of where you can go, it makes you think like that. I mean, you're right, where it seems to me that the alt-left really, Rabbit has it, I think Rabbit has it pointed down with the whole that it's the alt-right faction. The alt-left. It's like the alt-right faction, the left-wing faction of the alt-right. I'm trying to think, and it's like that. If that's true, then it's like it seems to me it's just a bunch of people who are in the fringes of the alt-right, but would rather talk about things which they know.
One thing is like I'm very passionate about things like art. Aesthetics, and the thing is, it's tough finding people who share that interest, but also share common political ground. Like there's a lot of writers who write about like art, culture, architecture, and I like to follow their work, but they might be on a different page politically, and they might be hesitant to talk on the show. Then on the other hand, a lot of people on the alt-right and paleo-conservative types, either they don't care as much about culture or they have kind of like rigid views. Like Rabbit's always talking about how the people in the alt-right view like all modern art as like degenerate.
Oh, yeah.
Though I am seeing a lot of interest. There's this faction, these people who are interested in like anime and like vaporwave.
And it's funny because I've been trying to get that audience where I'm trying to talk about Asian Aryanism, where it seems like, if the alt-right keeps continuing having interest in like anime and Japanese things, eventually they're going to be like people where it's like Mitsuki, or listen to Zuzu, where it becomes this, you are kind of this queer, but you listen to things which are, out there. But it's like, I see right now that if white girls are going to fail their position, they're kind of intoxicated with like hardcore feminism and like male hating, then geeky like got kids like me who go on the internet all the time, we're just going to desire Asian women more often and then prefer Asian porn.
So on our last show, we did touch upon the film Mishima, Life in 4 Chapters, and you told me you didn't get a chance to watch the film, but I mean, you did get a chance to kind of look over like a lot of the images from the film.
Mm-hmm.
And what's fascinating about the film is it does kind of combine like futurism with a lot of like traditional Japanese aesthetics.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because the film is called Life in 4 Chapters, and I'm thinking to myself, like his last tetralogy of works, where you had Spring Snow, Runaway Horses, and I think the last one's Decay of the Angel. I forget the third one, but it's funny because it's symbolic with the number 4, and I guess the director, when he's showing this movie, I could definitely see like his whole Mishima's private army, where they're looking into the sky and looking at the shrine, as if there's like, because there's one part in I'm not so, it's really hard to read the last 4 books by Mishima, and I've only really read Spring Snow, and it's funny because it starts out like as a young character, but Mishima has this one alter ego where he's basically like this evil political fascist that basically wants to like take down society. And I think the movie might reference that. It seems to me by these images. I know at the very end of the movie on YouTube, it's basically like he's ready to kill himself and he's ready to die, and he's basically so kind of very over dramatic in such a way. But yeah, I mean, it goes back to that whole thing about that aesthetic film where it's really about his life and really about who he is as a person, and some of how complicated, artistic some of how he thinks about things are.
There's the different ones, like there's like what's it called, the temple?
The Temple of the Golden Pavilion.
Temple of the Golden Pavilion.
Yeah, and I see that in that movie he was. Yeah, that's the picture I was thinking. Like
that does remind me a little bit of that place There's that place I told you about at LACMA. I mean, obviously you've never been there, of this Japanese pavilion.
No.
You can kind of, I think it was actually built in the 80s. I'll send you a picture of it really quick. But I've always been fascinated by that place. And you do see that similar aesthetic. It's really a cool place. You have like this spiral staircase, and it's...
Mm-hmm. That's...
And everything is at the very top. I think a lot of places are kind of designed for purely practical purposes, as opposed to like a place of like exploration. Most people want to go to a museum. They want to go into the building really quick and see everything. And you see that with a lot of architecture.
Yeah, that's interesting that it's kind of the Japanese museum in this kind of where, you're walking it up. I mean, I haven't been here, but it looks something like of the Philadelphia Art Museum, where in their Asian section, they have a Japanese house right in this big indoor place. And you're kind of just walking through, and then it's like this strange wax museum where you're preserving an older culture while we as people are looking at it. I mean, as if we can look at Japan and observe it.
Oh, what's interesting is the construction started in 1978 and it was completed in 1988.
Interesting. 88 being like, I guess the age of vaporwave or some kind of strange 80s.
The architect who designed it I don't think he was Japanese. His name was Bruce Goff.
Bruce Goff? I've never really heard his name, but that's interesting.
There's places like that. Like I talked about like the Embarcadero Center in San Francisco, where you go in to these places and you have like these courtyards and fountains and this kind of like 70s to 80s futurist aesthetic. You can see it if you go to New York. Like suggest visiting like some of John Portman's work. Mm-hmm. And there's this kind of notion in urbanism now that everything has to be on street level, but you go inside like a newer building, and it's everything is very bland.
I mean, that's interesting.
Did you see that video I sent you? That new retrowave band, that video Tokyo Blues.
Yes, and I thought that was funny by Le Cassette or by. I think that's funny because it's as if you're in Japan during that period, and as if you were living out a teenage or childhood memory in that. Like, it's funny because
it's like a dream-like feel. Like you see these escalators, and then you go through like this futuristic tunnel, and there's all this like pink and turquoise neon.
Yeah, it's funny because there's a place in New York City I really like called Kinokuya. It's basically a Japanese. I call it the Japanese bookstore, and it's funny because it has an elevator in there, and when you basically, it reminds me of that, where you take the elevator upstairs, and then you're basically showed in front of this giant Inoue mural painting of Vagabond, one of his mangas, and he's like a very well-known manga artist, and he hand-drawn the art there, and it's kind of gives you this aesthetic where it's like that aesthetic, that vaporwave aesthetic, but it's not actually vaporwave, but it reminds me more of that whole building where it's like you're in this tower, but you're flooded with all this Japanese culture all at once, and just looking out in front of the outside world, and it's just interesting on that respect where the viewer becomes a part of the art in some respect.
I wonder where that La Cassetta video was filmed.
It looked like it was Japan. I don't know. It just the people looked Japanese. I don't know. I could be just, but it just reminds me of Kinokuya in New York, and I go there and it's just whoa. It's like it has a pastry thing at the top, a little manga section, but it's known for it's a Vagabond with the escalator, and you go up and you stay Mr. Takehiko Inoue just painting this giant Vagabond thing. I was just shocked when I saw that, and it's just like, because I've been reading Inoue since I was a teenager, and I kind of knew about his art in Japan. I just didn't know who he was, and he has some Japanese aesthetic to him, and I always think it's interesting that he's just so close to. He did this mural for New York City, and I just think that's amazing. And I don't know.
What do you think about that image of the Pink Hotel from Mishima? I'm actually working on a painting of that.
I think it really gives the color of being erotic. Like, it looks like
Yeah, pink
somewhere.
is kind of. I mean,
It
pink,
looks like I would get some, like, call girl and just be there. And,
well,
like,
in the film, there actually is a scene where Mishima is with a prostitute, and you see her like luscious naked body lying on the pink bed, and you see all the lights of like all the neon signs like over her body.
that's funny.
It's a very beautiful erotic scene.
Yeah, because it seems like this pink scene where it feels like it seems like, you know, I would bring my girlfriend or some girl I just liked and I just met, and I'll bring her to this pink room, and then we'll be like cuddling and dry sex for about like 8 hours, and then maybe actual sex, and then what do they say, Netflix and chill, or cuddle and Chromecast or something. It seems like one of those scenes where it's like to the maximum point, but it seems like, but at the same time, these erotic scenes are basically like the dream you've had, the wet dream you've always wanted, or some kind of strange, where you almost feel security and comfort in that environment. Especially if that Asian aesthetic definitely gives it this kind of feel where it has something to do with the sexuality between, you know, you and the other person. I find that it's a very a comfortable tying-in scene. Although Mishima himself, you know, in his book Forbidden Colors, he wrote about being married to a woman, but he really had homosexual desires, and he's complicated with the fact that women are so modernized that they don't have loving values. And just to be off a little topic, but it just makes me think that in the context of Mishima, does Mishima really enjoy this pink room or hotel?
I sent you some pictures of from John C. Portman's architecture, and he's an architect who designed a lot of futuristic hotels in the 80s and 70s and 80s. I mean, I'm a big fan of his work.
That's John C. Portman Jr.'s. It's interesting because it does have some aesthetic to it. I guess, you know, I never really heard the decadent criticism, but I know that anything's really decadent if it doesn't follow, you know, like the classical European tradition, and rather it's this kind of...
It does? I think it has a Japanese influence.
Yeah, it's like decadent is usually like this kooky, gobbledygook, super multi-liberal cosmopolitan nonsense, and it's just like, it's like those butt plugs in Sweden, right? And then there was like this one right-wing protester who deflated it, right? That's literally decadent art. And I just think like Portman, at least there's some like a lot being put into it, and it looks like this huge like different world. I mean,
the first ones I sent you were of Atlanta. The last one is of the one in San Francisco that I actually visited, and like I took some pictures of it on my last trip there.
Interesting. I mean, it does remind me, like, it really does remind me like some kind of future, some kind of strange 3-dimensional, like 11th dimensional society where everything's based upon math, and like you go to the point where it's no longer like a brick or triangle, but rather like this thing with all these different angles or something like that. And it's just like all these things are going on at once. It's definitely something interesting, to definitely a world you want to roleplay in, or some kind of world you kind of wish you were a part of. And it gives me that feeling with Portman Jr.
Pilleater, we're at the end of the show. But before I wrap things up, is there anything else you'd like to add about Jamie, Stewart, and Shushu?
Yes, I just want to say Zuzu is definitely a very interesting act. If you don't know who they are, I suggest check them out and listen up on their stuff. They have very interesting aesthetics, especially within Asian Aryan context, and maybe in the alt-left terminology. And I also have to thank Alex, too, for showing me Mitsuki. I think I have a new crush now.
It's interesting, like, he mentioned he wasn't familiar with, like, a vaporwave, but some of his videos do remind me of that. I saw, like, a recent music video, and you have these, like, bright sort of pink turquoise colors.
That's like one of their photos. I think I know what one you're talking about. I
forget the album, but...
it's just like this weird, playful, colorful background, this strange, like, it's definitely a different world, and definitely somewhere else that's not European and not exactly full frontal Asian. It's this strange synergy, I always say synergy between the two, but it definitely gives this weird avant-garde expression. Definitely.
Pilleater, it's been a great show. Thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me on, Robert. Talk to you next time.
And Jamie's not here, but also appreciate having him on.